Welcome, everybody, to the third and final segment of this webinar series, Fears versus Facts About Breast Cancer. Before we start, I just want to say how much we appreciate you joining in for the series and for the many positive comments and questions we've received. The webinar tonight is the last of this series, but we look forward to bringing you much more material in the future. So please look out for our communications going forward. If you haven't seen part 1 and or part 2 of this webinar series, you can find them posted on our blog. Simply go to thermographyclinic.com/blog. So again, clinic.com/blog, B-L-O-G. And in the latest 2 blogs, you'll see them posted there. If you can't find them, just send us an email and we'll be happy to assist you. So now, if you're tuning in for your first time with us, let me introduce you to board-certified clinical thermologist Alexander Mostovoy presenting to you tonight. Alexander is a clinician, writer, researcher, and public speaker, and recognized as a leading authority on breast health and cancer prevention. After practicing homeopathy for 20 years, he is now devoting his full time to medical thermography. Alexander pioneered Canada nearly 20 years ago with a commitment to making this imaging tool available to as many people as possible. He's lectured extensively across Canada, the United States, South America, and Europe, and has educated and trained physicians in breast cancer prevention and the use of medical thermography. He is the author of The Breast Cancer is a Preventable Disease and a co-creator of the 2016 Breast Cancer Prevention Global Virtual Conference. So without further ado, here's Alexander Mostovoy, and enjoy your webinar.
Thank you, Tally, and once again, welcome everyone. It's been very satisfying for me to see so many people registering and so many people logging in and so many people actually watching recordings as well. So I want to kind of say thank you to you. It's been very satisfying work for me. And I, as Tally mentioned, I have authored a book called Breast Cancer is a Preventable Disease. And this is what I feel really passionately about. That not just breast cancer, but the majority of cancers are preventable. Now today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject called nutrition. There's a lot of disinformation about nutrition. There's a lot of confusion. There are all sorts of different stories, and in the age of fake news, who do you kind of trust and who do you believe? Yet, there is no activity that we do more frequently than eat. Probably other than breathing, this is the most time that we spend is actually eating. So what we actually put in our mouth is very important. And I think this is it warrants definitely an interesting discussion. So stay tuned and we'll see what happens next. Let food be thy medicine. I didn't say this, Hippocrates did. And I love the picture. I think it's very colorful. I think it just kind of displays not just the colors, but different shapes and different tastes. Anyway, you can probably tell that I'm very much into food, and I haven't had supper yet, so I'm getting hungry just looking at this. Breast cancer epidemic, as you can see, that in the past 30, 40, 50 years, there's been definitely an increase in breast cancer. There's been a very kind of short decline in year 2001, 2002, when the study came out showing and proving that conventional hormone replacement therapy doesn't really work. It actually promotes breast cancer And a lot of women definitely got off synthetic HRT. And that is attributable to this little spike right here, as you can see, or I wouldn't say a spike, a decline in breast cancer incidence. Now, I want to introduce something completely different today, and I want you to kind of listen to what I'm just going to say, because that's going to help you understand the rest of today's webinar. So it's called the dripping tap. If a floor is flooded as a result of dripping tap, it is of little use to mop up the floor unless the tap is turned off. The water from the tap represents the cause of disease. The flooded floor, the diseases filling out our hospital beds. Medical students learn far more about methods of floor mopping than about turning off taps. And doctors, or specialists in mops and brushes, can earn infinitely more than those dedicated to shutting off taps. And I want to add to this that unfortunately pharmaceutical companies are selling just tissue paper to help with mopping floors. So having said that, let's go back to worldwide breast cancer rates. You have seen this probably in your first episode, where North America, Argentina, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand have the highest incidence of breast cancer, whereas China, India, Sub-Saharan Africa have the lowest incidence. Now, because in North America, and just about everywhere in the world today, we have people from so many different cultures and different genetic pool, there goes the theory that breast cancer is a genetic disease. Obviously, there's something about environmental, and by environment, I mean cultural influences that predisposes women to getting breast cancer. Let's also look at what is really cancer. Is it really a disease or it's a symptom? Now, conventionally, of course, everyone says that it is a disease. And conventional thought is, let's kill the tumor. As long as we can shrink the tumor, we can eradicate the tumor, we can excise it, we can contain the disease. I'm suggesting another paradigm that instead of dealing with the so-called disease, I consider that to be a symptom. And therefore, if this is a symptom, let's try and strengthen the terrain, right? In other words, instead of using external force, let's use the internal force to try and deal with the symptom rather than with disease. I want to introduce this study, which I think we briefly spoke about again in the first or second episode, I don't remember. But just to introduce this, here is the key difference in lifestyle. They took Asian women that live in San Francisco and compared to the same Asian women that live in China and Shanghai. And then when they looked at the incidence of breast cancer, they saw that incidence in San Francisco is much, much higher. Even with women who are 35, 45, 55, 65, 75, way higher than incidence of breast cancer in Shanghai. Now, again, genetically, these are the same Asian women. The only difference is that the ones that live in San Francisco are living there second and third generation. They also realized that estrogen levels in Asian women were 40% lower. So what does that mean? It means that your environment, not your genetics, your nutrition, your estrogen mechanisms or estrogen levels can contribute to breast cancer incidence. So cancer is also, we can look at that as a loss of equilibrium. There are certain things that are promoters of cancer, and there are certain called inhibitors. For instance, smoking and alcohol is a promoter of cancer, whereas phytochemicals are inhibiting cancer. Sugar and white flour are promoting, whereas proper nutrition are inhibiting. High doses of omega-6 are promoting because it's pro-inflammatory, whereas anti-inflammatory omega-3 is inhibiting, and so on and so forth. In other words, chemical pollution, sedentary lifestyle, stress, carcinogenic personality, which we discussed before, lack of sunshine versus stress management, fitness, physical activity, detoxification. These are all inhibitors. And cancer doesn't just appear overnight. It usually takes a long time for 2 cells to grow into 4 cells, to grow into 8 cells, and so on and so forth. So there is an initiation kind of idea. In other words, inflammation is part of that initiation process. Matrix toxicity, emotional disturbance, addictions, iodine deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, nutrient deficiencies, microorganisms such as viruses, bacteria, parasites, as we discussed before, dental, gastrointestinal infections, food allergies, and so on and so forth. This is obviously not a complete list, but I just picked a few things that you can probably relate to. And since we're going to be talking about nutrition, we need to understand that the gut really is the second brain. There was a well-known book that was published a few years ago, and the intestine or the digestive system has its own nervous system. That's how important it is. Not every organ has its own nervous system. It's got millions and millions of neurons, even more than the spinal cord. And the gut really, I don't want to say that the gut completely is in control of the brain, but the brain doesn't really completely control the gut either. It's a two-way street. In other words, your emotions are also influenced by the gut. When you feel butterflies in your stomach, that is a stress response. When you have a disturbed sleep, or let's say if you eat something that doesn't really agree with you overnight, you may actually experience nightmares. And anxiety and gut connection is well established. It's well known that antidepressants cause gastrointestinal problems. And it's also well known that 95% of serotonin, which is a happy neurotransmitter, is found in the bowels, not in the brain. So that's a very important thing to understand. Even though we don't see the gut as the second brain, it really is. Now, I want to talk about obesity trends, because the shape of things to come, as you can see, from so-called prehistoric man to hunter-gatherer, and basically to someone who is very androgynous. And here we are looking at obesity trends. So if you're looking at the definition of obesity today is basal metabolic index over 30. So between 25 to 30, you're called overweight, and over 30, in other words, or about 30 pounds overweight, you're hitting that obesity definition. And look what happened in the past almost 30 years. Whereas in 1990, you are seeing the map of the United States, you're looking at about 10, 14, maybe 15% of each individual state with obesity rates. In other words, BMI over 30. In about 10 years, you're looking at half of the country now has about 20 to 24%. By 2008, you're looking at a lot of reds and some kind of darker reds and a lot of yellows. Now we're getting into 25 to 30%. And finally, just about 4 or 5 years ago, the last one on your slide, which is 2015, you're looking at incredible numbers. You're looking at 30 to 34%, some states even over 35%. And the latest data I have is that we have overall close to 40% of US adults obese. So think about this for a moment. Now, this also happens to coincide with the spike in sugar consumption. Prior to Industrial Revolution, 1830s, 1850s, there's hardly any sugar in the diet. Then we started importing sugar, then we started using sugar, and you can see that the spike right after World War II, the sugar consumption is really out of this chart. It continues to rise, by the way. I want you to take a look at this, that the average per person per year, the average person in North America consumes 64 donuts. I don't eat donuts, so if this is the average, somebody must be eating 148 donuts a year because I don't eat any. 50 gallons of soda pop, 180 pounds of refined sugar, and 4 pounds of additives and preservatives. So this is one of the reasons. This is not the only reason, but this is one of the reasons why we're gaining weight. And I want you to understand what you're looking at this particular slide. It's called the Warburg effect. It's a common feature in cancers and serves as the basic of one of the most important diagnostic tools in cancer treatment. So this is an image of a PET scan. Okay, and what they do, they inject radioactively labeled glucose and then see the absorption of cancer cells with the glucose. So you can see how cancer sucks up glucose or sugar. And you can see that this is metastatic because there are several sites. This is the way PET scans work, positive electron tomography. They concentrate on basically sugar absorption by malignant cells. So USA versus the world, I think the USA is definitely leading. In Canada, we're not far behind, and in many other countries, we're not far behind. This is the statistic of basically 2/3 of the population, adult population in the United States, are overweight compared to 37% worldwide. And the unfortunate thing here is that the children today, 1/3 or close to 1/3 of children are overweight as well, meaning that this is the first time where our life expectancy is not only declining already, but will continue to decline, because if you have overweight children, you will have overweight adults, and you will have sick adults as they're growing up. So, make America great again? I don't think that this is the way we want to make it great again, just by being bigger and bigger. Being overweight can cause 13 types of well-known cancers. And if you look at the larger circles, you'll see breast, you'll see bowel, and you'll see womb. Then you'll see kidney and pancreas and so on and so forth. But being overweight predisposes you to these types of cancer. Which foods contribute to weight gain? I want you to look at this and remember our culprits as well as remember our good guys, because you will continuously see them as we go along with this webinar. So if you're going to be eating potato chips, well, big surprise, you're going to be gaining weight. If you're going to be eating fries, you're going to be gaining weight. If you're going to be eating processed meats, unprocessed red meats, if you're going to be eating butter, and so on and so forth, you'll be gaining weight. The ones on your left are foods that are actually will help you lose weight. Vegetables, nuts, whole grains, fruits, even yogurt. I think yogurt is there simply because of the bioactive effects of probiotics. And then the same thing with beverages. If you're going to be drinking sugar-sweetened beverages, definitely you will be gaining weight, as well as fruit juices. Okay, so what is insulin resistance? It's very prevalent, and it definitely leads not only to conditions like diabetes, but insulin resistance really leads to being overweight and hormonal disturbances. So let's say you're eating a food, that food has to make insulin, but if you're eating those foods that will spike your insulin very high, your cells after a while will resist that insulin. And then sugar stores will be stored as fat. And now what's going to happen is you will feel hungry and you will feel tired, and therefore you will start eating those foods again. You will start craving them again. It's kind of a vicious circle, if you want. Now, insulin resistance is basically, you can look at this, that being insulin resistant will lead to fatigue, will lead to constant hunger, because your body is not really being nourished. You are not able to lose weight. You continue to crave sugar because it kind of gives your adrenals a jerk. You will feel fatigued after meals. You know, I'm sure by now you've realized that there are certain foods that you may be eating and you feel fine and energetic. And by the way, you should be feeling energetic after your meals. And there are certain foods that you'll eat and be ready to go to sleep. Guess what? Probably these foods are kicking in too much insulin. You may even experience migrating aches and pains. Upper abdominal obesity will set in. And remember what we were talking about last time with insulin resistance, and abdominal obesity will start producing more estrogen. And as you produce more estrogen, that will suppress your thyroid. And of course, that will increase your fat storage. It will lead to elevated levels of cortisol, again, back to hormonal imbalance. And then we may have conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, facial hair, infertility, and so on and so forth. So the biology of obesity comes back to eating high refined carbohydrates and sugar diet, which is very, very common. And especially if you're eating out, if you're not cooking for yourself, there's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of salt, there's a lot of high refined carbohydrates that are going into your meals. That leads to high insulin. That leads to insulin resistance. Finally, your liver converts sugar into fat. High insulin prevents fat from coming out of your cells, so you're holding onto it. And finally, the hypothalamus increases the set weight. Set weight is a very, very important concept in weight management. It works like a thermostat, if you wish. So you set your thermostat, let's say, to 20 degrees Celsius, and it doesn't really matter what happens outside. The thermostat is going to keep it steady. Now, if you open the window and it's very cold out there, the cold air brushes in, the thermostat still has to keep 20 degrees Celsius temperature in the room, right? So it doesn't really matter what you're going to be eating or not eating. Once your hypothalamus increases the set weight or the set point, that's how you continue to gain weight, and you can't lose it, okay? There's a way to reset it, of course, but that's very, very difficult. As we all know that it's much easier to gain than to lose. Now, that leads to a metabolic syndrome treatment, okay? So number one is exercise. Even though you don't feel like it, it's just like with adrenal fatigue. You tell people with adrenal fatigue, you need to move, but I don't have the energy to move. No, you need to move, and that's how you're going to get the energy. And there have been studies that show that strength training only after 15 weeks, so say under 4 months, reduced insulin growth factor, okay? You need to be on a low glycemic diet, okay? You need to have proper sleep hygiene. You need to have cortisol management, because if you're under stress, this thing is not going to work, okay? Remember that cortisol is going to spike and is going to steal certain hormones, create hormones like estrogen that will, again, not completely block, but definitely insulin, influence the way your thyroid works. And you also need to pay attention to avoidance of obesogens and endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals, pollutants, also xenoestrogens. They will contribute to obesity as well, because they mimic the effect of estrogen. So with metabolic symptom treatment, I would use chromium. I would advise you to have some green tea, look into zinc supplementation, vanadium, magnesium, very, very important. One of the most utilized minerals in our diet, as well as supplementation. Inositol with alpha lipoic acid, fish oils, which are very good, CoQ10, carnitine, vitamin D, berberine, cinnamon, bitter lemon, also very good for people with metabolic syndrome, fenugreek, Siberian ginseng, not Panax. Siberian ginseng is neutral. The other ones are warming. And finally, holy basil. So again, I'm not suggesting you use all these, but look into this and see if you are suffering from metabolic syndrome, here maybe is the treatment for you. Now, the next thing, which is kind of almost from the same family, it's not just high insulin levels or insulin resistance, but now we're talking about inflammation, because inflammation really is the mother of all disease. And inflammation will lead to cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, pulmonary diseases, obviously arthritis, autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, and guess what? Diabetes as well. Now, the inflammation really is the silent killer. And if you look on the left, the diseases caused by inflammation: obesity, diabetes, gingivitis, cardiovascular disease, eye disorders, joint pain, colon, breast, lung cancers. Again, we were just talking about metabolic syndrome. Infection may actually cause inflammation. Injury may actually cause inflammation, but these things, infection and injury, generally kind of go away on their own if your immune system is working properly. Arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, asthma, allergies, that's also part of the inflammatory response. Ulcerative colitis, inflammatory bowel disease. There's more, way, way more. But foods that promote inflammation, remember, I asked you to remember the bad guys. And these bad guys are here as well. Hydrogenated fats, vegetable shortening, margarine, meats, processed meats, fried foods, sugar, sweets, all sorts of food allergies. Dairy products will contribute to inflammatory response. Wheat products, refined grains, alcohol, high fructose sugar, corn syrup, and omega-6. Now, some people, and you need to be tested for that, unless you already know, nitrate families, which is basically tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, will cause inflammation in many people. So unless you know or you don't know, get tested first, and then you can eliminate those foods from the nitrate family as well. Inflammation and cancer, you can measure that with your blood test. It's called a C-reactive protein. CRP. Now, cancer is an inflammatory process, and inflammatory mediators facilitate cancer growth and metastasis. So again, there were studies, and many meta-analysis studies, that showed that elevated C-reactive protein is associated with increased risk of getting cancer. Now, also, cancer survivors with high CRP are at greater risk for cancer-related mortality. And here you will see, this is a chart. So at the top of the chart, at 100%, that's 100% of patients surviving. And then the time in days, that's the bottom line, that goes from 0. So obviously at 0, we have 100% of patients surviving. At 200 days, you can see people with low CRP have close, a little bit over 60% surviving, whereas the high CRP, 20% of them. And then the blue line continues to decline to the point where the higher the inflammatory rate, the more likely you're going to not survive. And at some point in time, it will come down to about 0 or just above 0 at 1,000 days. Whereas if you keep your inflammation low, you are still at about 40–50% surviving rate, okay? So that's a very, very important thing for you to realize, that C-reactive protein can be measured in blood, and you should be regularly measuring this marker to know whether you have high or low inflammation. Foods that fight inflammation. And again, look at the good guys: fruits and vegetables, broccoli, spinach, dark leafy greens, non-refined grains, ginger, curry, basil, garlic, turmeric. On the right side of your screen, you will see the name of these foods: garlic, leeks, scallions, and then inhibition of cancer cell growth. And some of them go off the chart, off by 100%. In other words, the first half of your food choices really are cancer killers. You're looking at spinach, you're looking at kale, asparagus, and so on, onions, broccoli. And then as you go down, these are also cancer killers, but not off the chart like the ones at the top of your screen. So that's a very important thing for you to understand, that the good guys will still be the good guys, whether you're fighting cancer, whether you're fighting inflammation, whether you're fighting insulin resistance. These are the same foods that work or don't work for you, okay? Fight inflammation as well as cancer, okay? Same characters. So for treatment of inflammatory issues or inflammation, if your CRP is high, you can, again, you need to exercise, okay? You need to move. But you can also use fish oil. You can also use a herbal thing called bromelain, curcumin, or turmeric, very, very effective. Green tea, have good quality green tea, 1 or 2 cups a day. Resveratrol, boswellia, quercetin with vitamin C. Also helps with allergies. Ginger. We know we can use ginger in food, but we can also put ginger into your tea. Just cut raw ginger, put it into your tea, infuse it. Great to fight inflammation. Also great to warm up your stomach and kill bugs in your digestive tract as well. Grapeseed extract and acetylcysteine. You can take that as a supplement. Pomegranate juice. Again, it's been shown that pomegranate juice, even though it is acidic and even though it is kind of, as long as it doesn't contain sugar, very, very good at kind of keeping inflammation down. Vitamin E, make sure these are tocotrienols. Melatonin, we were talking about melatonin before, that it also helps you sleep, and it also helps you with kind of balancing your hormones as well. And finally, vitamin C. You can take probably more than 2,000 grams a day, milligrams, which is 2 grams. But, some people may not be comfortable with that. Sometimes you can push it to bowel tolerance. It's entirely up to you, because you basically get it out with your urine. Now, if we're talking about fats, as I mentioned before, there's omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, and omega-6. And that's really a simplification, because both of them could be anti-inflammatory. But the problem is that omega-3 and omega-6 are types of so-called essential fatty acids. In other words, we can't really make them, so we need to get them from our diet. Unfortunately, the diet today contains very few sources of omega-3 fatty acids. So it mainly comes from cold fish, salmon, sardines, herring, mackerel, black cod, bluefish. And the vegetarian sources of omega-3 may be walnuts, flax seeds, and a few others. Now, omega-6 fatty acids are very numerous, as I mentioned before. In other words, it contains in seeds, it contains in nuts, in oils, okay, refined vegetable oils, soy oil, and oils that are used in food production. It's mostly, unfortunately, omega-6, or worse, by the way. So snack foods, cookies, crackers, sweets, in North American diet, that's a fast food. Soybean also contains omega-6, and it's used in food production as well. So hormones will be derived from these two classes of essential fatty acids, okay? And as I said, they have opposite effects. So omega-6, I'm oversimplifying, tend to increase inflammation, and omega-3 tends to decrease inflammation. And it's all in the balance. I'm not saying that you don't need omega-6 and only omega-3, you need both, but the balance is very, very important. And I want to show you what happened, again, historically, what happened to our fats. So again, 10,000 years ago, assuming that we know what the diet was, but some people say they do, these were kind of straight lines. We didn't have a lot of saturated fat. We didn't have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids or omega-3 fatty acids. And then as the industrial production of animals starts to kind of become more and more prominent in our culture, you can see that the saturated fat line starts going up, and it continues to go to rise, by the way. And then the omega-6 fatty acids, again, the blue line, also takes a spike up, whereas omega-3 fatty acids takes a dive. And that, in my opinion, that seems to be a big, big problem. Okay, not just the saturated fat, but specifically these essential fatty acids. And here's what the problem. Whereas before, certain foods were actually healthy. If you had normal butter 60 years ago, in 1960, normal butter was a good food. And the same thing with beef, and the same thing with egg. But because of the industrial production of animals, and because of the animal feed that has changed, and because we influence those animals with hormones and antibiotics and all sorts of other nasty things, now butter has 6 times the amount of omega-6 versus omega-3, okay? Whereas compared to 60 years ago, pork has increased by 10-fold, beef has increased by 15-fold, and egg, which was considered to be a good protein source and a good source of different fats, and it still is, but egg has become one of the most inflammatory foods. The same thing with meat. And that's why, in my opinion, that's why a lot of people that test for allergies will test for positive for egg allergies as well, because it's a highly inflammatory food today. Again, I'm not talking about you growing your own chicken or your neighbor is growing their chicken and the chicken is not fed antibiotics. I'm not talking about clear eggs the way they used to be, okay, or grass-fed meat the way it used to be. I'm talking about industrial production today. So you have to be very, very careful, and this is where the problem is with these fats. So omega-6 has to be in particular ratio to omega-3. Ideally, I know we don't live in an ideal world, but we should know about this. Ideally, it should be 1-to-1, and maybe up to 5-to-1, of 6-to-3. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, most of us consume improper foods that lead to 20-to-1 or even 50-to-1 ratios. And guess what? Of course, it's going to influence us on a hormonal level. There's no doubt about this. So you can see here, grain-fed beef has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio that is 6 times higher than grass-fed beef. You see, it's important what these animals eat because their tissue is actually inflamed. So these high ratios promote inflammation, promote heart disease, promote cancer, and so many other degenerative diseases. I'm not saying that if you have a piece of steak once, something is going to happen. Of course, it's a cumulative effect. But if you have a steak, and then if you have refined carbohydrate with this, and then if you have some pasta with that, and you wash it down with a glass of wine, and then you have a cigarette with this, while watching TV, not exercising, it's going to catch up to you. I can almost guarantee that. Now, I also want to kind of talk to you about iodine deficiency because it's very, very important, okay? Iodine deficiency will lead and may lead to some of these symptoms such as cold skin, weight gain, fatigue, dry skin, goiter, constipation, depression, brittle nails, of course, huge when it comes to hypothyroidism, the way your memory functions, even hair loss as well. And iodine deficiency is very, very difficult to identify because, again, if we remember what we were talking about, insufficient methods of testing the way your thyroid works. But I can almost predict that the majority of people listening to this are iodine deficient. So breast cancer and hypothyroidism, the relationship has been established for over 100 years ago. There's no doubt about that. Hypothyroidism usually precedes breast cancer, okay? I have had a lot of in my clinical experience, I have seen that many, many, many times. Hypothyroidism also predisposes to poor immune system. In other words, if your thyroid is not working well, usually you're cold, you're much more prone to not even spiking a fever, and therefore when you get a cold or a flu and you can't spike a fever and kill the virus with over 38-degree temperature fever, it takes you way longer to get over the disease, and it takes you way longer to recover, okay? So also, hypothyroidism can alter other hormones. It affects the way your adrenals work. It will affect your ovarian and pituitary hormones as well. So here's an incidence of breast cancer reported to be higher in those that took thyroid hormone. In other words, the synthetic medications such as levothyroxine, for instance, which is T4 and not T3. T3 is the active form of thyroid, right? So here we go. Someone is hypothyroid, diagnosed, they're given proper meds, no doubt about that. But unfortunately, they have a higher incidence of breast cancer because they are still iodine deficient. Oh, so the common link is iodine. And over the last 40 years, iodine levels have declined by more than 50%. Food has declined. Our consumption of good fish has declined as well. Our soil is depleted as well. And guess what? Breast cancer rates have risen dramatically. So thyroid illness, such as hypothyroid autoimmune, cancer have risen dramatically as well. So the use of thyroid hormones is not enough, especially in the presence of iodine deficiency. It will actually exacerbate an iodine deficient condition. So to prevent iodine deficiency, we are looking at a couple of things. Breast is a sponge for iodine, okay, especially very, very important. Iodine prevents and treats fibrocystic breast. Iodine is a great antibacterial and antifungal. The goiter belt, where I live in the Great Lake regions, that's called a goiter belt for a reason, because we have a higher incidence of thyroid conditions as well as higher incidence of breast cancer. So you actually need 20 to 40 times more than needed to prevent goiter. Okay, and again, we know that Asian women consume more iodine and have 7 times less breast cancer. So thyroid medications, as I mentioned before, plus iodine deficiency actually increase the incidence of breast cancer. So here are some foods that you can consume to kind of get iodine naturally. Sea kale is, of course, #1, and then you will have some fish and seaweeds and so on and so forth. There are some plant-based iodine-rich foods such as spinach, oats, potatoes actually have higher iodine content. And then there are some animal-based iodine foods, sardines, salmon, cod, milk, cheese, sea vegetable. Again, milk and cheese is not my preference for iodine, definitely not yogurt. But you know, if you want to supplement with kelp or sea vegetable, I think it's one of the best. Now, alkaline versus acidic foods. Remember Warburg effect that we've seen where cancer cells were gobbling up sugar and glucose? Well, the same Dr. Warburg, who received the Nobel Prize in 1931 for proving that cancer can survive in alkaline, oxygen-rich environment, but derives in acidic, low oxygen environment. Okay, so what he is saying is this: every single person who has cancer has a pH that's too acidic. Let's look at that for a second. Acidic foods, again, acid promoting. Remember our culprits and remember our good guys: corn, meat, fish, fowl, eggs, wine, most grains, coffee, aged cheese, liver and organ meats. Most breads will promote acid. Alkaline promoting: most fruits, most vegetables, orange juice, chocolate, well, here you go, potato, spinach, dandelion greens. They will promote an alkaline environment. And it's very, very important. And here you see highly alkaline foods on your left bottom: cucumber, kale, kelp, spinach, parsley, and so on and so forth. Then moderately alkaline, and then finally low alkaline. But you can actually test yourself, get yourself a stick. You can do it with first morning urine to see whether or not you're in the acidic, neutral, or alkaline environment. You want to be neutral to alkaline. You don't want to be too alkaline, because that will also promote some problems as well. But you don't want to be on the acidic side as well. So, of course, what you eat is going to determine your pH as well. Here's a whole list of alkaline foods. There's some that will suggest that the more raw foods you eat, the more likely, of course, they're going to be alkaline. And 80% is suggested to eat alkaline foods versus 20% acidic foods. Not sure how practical it is unless you really consume more fruits and vegetables. Okay. Now, here's again another list. If you look in the middle of your screen, you will see kind of in white or gray food category: spices, and then we have preservatives, then we have meat, fowl, grains, nuts, beans, citrus fruit, and fruit. So anything on your left these foods are going to be alkaline from most to lowest, and anything on the right, that's going to be, of course, acidic or acid causing. So I want to introduce another concept, that the whole thing is very important, that you also properly detoxify, because you can eat the best foods, but if you are toxic, and there are several reasons why you may have toxicity levels that are high, then you need to understand the kind of process that your liver and your body needs to go through to detoxify, to kind of work at the optimal level, if you wish. So it's estimated that 90% of all cancers are due to environmental carcinogens combined with nutrient deficiencies needed for proper detoxification. Now, just bear with me, it's not as complicated as it looks. So suppose you have toxins, we're starting from top left, okay? And that has to go through phase 1, going to phase 2, and then eliminated as waste products, okay? So phase 1 is basically fat soluble things. You will need certain foods as well as certain substances like folic acids, vitamins. You will need calcium, vitamin D3 to have proper function of that phase 1. Now, your toxin may include estrogens, pollutants, contaminants, insecticides, pesticides, drugs, alcohol, metabolic end products, etc., etc. And that has to move from phase 1 to phase 2. Now, after phase 2 also, you also need certain things like calcium deglucarate, lysine, glycine, L-carnitine, taurine, cruciferous vegetables will help. But unless you get stuck in phase 1, you're not going to move to phase 2. And unless you don't move to phase 2, you're not going to eliminate through the organs that will help with detoxification. So to put it in other ways, phase 1 basically will change non-water soluble chemicals into water soluble compounds. And that will be involved in secretion of hormones. So steroid hormones such as estrogen, cortisol, aldosterone, thyroxine, if they're not functioning properly, it will lead to estrogen dominance. We were talking about that last time. So you need proper metabolism, you need proper fat metabolism, and you need proper carbohydrate metabolism to make sure that your phase 1 works and moves things to phase 2. And here is how it works. So imagine phase 1 is run by enzymes in the liver. It needs to go from phase 1 to phase 2, as I said. Now, if it's not processed in phase 1, it will create DNA damage and the free radical damage to the liver. Okay? So smoking, alcohol, coffee, and nutrient deficiencies will interfere with phase 1 and affect phase 2. Also, xenoestrogens, birth control pill, conventional HRT have to be processed by the same phase 1 and phase 2 pathway, okay? Very important concept to understand, that it doesn't really matter. I mean, of course it matters what you eat, but you can eat healthy, and unless you detoxify, it may still not work for you. So here's your estrogen metabolism. Everything has to go through your liver. You remember we were talking about E1, estradiol, estriol. We were talking about good estrogens as well as bad estrogens. Last time we were talking about that ratio. Well, all of that needs specific phytonutrients, such as, say, vitamin E, lipoic acid, and a few others. It will also need specific supplements. So to aid in liver metabolism of estrogen, you may need indole-3-carbinol or DIM. You will also need specific vitamins, okay? The diet will be very helpful, okay? Your intestinal health is very, very important with probiotics, and you have to avoid antibiotics as much as possible. And then mineral supplements such as magnesium and selenium, and finally correct your insulin resistance. So I know it may sound complicated, but I just want you to understand that it's a whole, again, it's another symphony that's playing here. And everything has to work well for everything to work properly, to be in proper balance. Liver detox doesn't sound as horrible or as complicated, actually. It's very, very simple because it's a very resilient organ. Anti-estrogenic food, which we'll talk in a few minutes, in other words, will be eliminating estrogen-promoting foods and chemicals. Liver detox will be kind of facilitated with certain foods, certain spices and herbs. As I mentioned before, quercetin plus nettle, indole-3-carbinol, DIM, and again, increase of that physical activity will help as well. Of course, I'm assuming that you're already eating organic, okay? So other liver detoxifiers are green vegetables. All of them will help detoxify your liver, okay? So I can't say enough about green vegetables. Fruits, citrus fruits, berries, apples, papaya, pineapple, all liver detoxifiers. Even whole oats and barley, liver detoxifiers. Legumes, spices, anti-estrogenic spices such as thyme, oregano, turmeric, even some estrogenic licorice and hops. These are estrogenic spices. And herbs such as milk thistle, dandelion root, and ginger will help detoxify your liver. I want to talk about also another huge thing. It's called constipation, okay? You're not going to detoxify unless your bowels are working properly. And I hate to say this, but statistically, 63 million Americans, or 15% of the population, suffer from chronic constipation. It's unimaginable. Nobody wants to talk about this. And the so-called normal to constipation is just, kind of unreasonable. If you go once every 2-3 days, that's not considered to be constipated. I don't know. So major contributor to colon cancer, of course, is constipation. Major causes are analgesics, antacids, antihistamines, diuretics, iron supplements, opiates. Some antidepressants and muscle relaxants are one of the major causes of constipations. Of course, there are other factors. I find that a lot of people don't drink enough water. If you're not going to move, your intestines are going to protest as well. Endocrine disorders, such as thyroid, food allergies, dairy, low fiber diet, poor colon motility, neurological disorders, and finally psychological disorders. That will also contribute to constipation. And here's what I was alluding to before, that it is common, but it's not normal or healthy. It's common that less than 50% of the population has one bowel movement a day. Most will have 3 bowel movements a week. That's common, but common is not necessarily healthy. Diarrhea alternated with constipation is actually called irritable bowel disease. And cancer patients have disproportionately high incidence of constipation. So what is normal? Normal is between 1 to 3 bowel movements a day. Actually, healthy is to have 3 bowel movements a day. Let me tell you something, that babies, before they're toilet trained, they usually eat and poop. It's a natural instinct. As soon as they eat, there is a message to their rectal sphincter to release, because more food is coming, so we can release. Now, as we get toilet trained, and some of us have exceeded in that, we decide to hold things until the morning or until I'm in a comfortable place. Definitely not when I'm traveling, and so on and so forth. And I think you all know who you are. So we've exceeded in toilet training to the point where we become toxic if we're not eliminating on regular basis and several times a day. So high fiber foods, hydration, exercise, deep breathing, diaphragm function, that helps as well. And if you really get kind of clogged up, I would suggest colonics or enemas when it's necessary. Do we get enough fiber? Well, the recommended fiber content in the United States is 20 to 35 grams. We actually get about half of that, 12 to 18 grams a day of fiber. In UK, the recommended fiber content is even less. It's 18 grams a day, and the current UK diet is 12 grams, okay? Just way less fruits and vegetables in usual diet in United Kingdom than in America. It says something about them. I don't even want to go further with this, but look at this. Rural African diet between 60 to 120 grams. Rural Chinese diet 77 grams, because they're not eating junk. They can't afford to buy junk. That's why they're eating fruits and vegetables, and mostly vegetables, and maybe a little bit of rice. And once in a while, maybe they'll have a little bit of meat or whatever protein source, but they have much, much higher levels of fiber. And if you look at the Paleolithic diet, in other words, something that our forefathers and foregrandmothers used to eat, that is definitely way more fiber. And that's when we really didn't have cancer and heart disease. And that's why I believe that some countries where they have definitely higher fiber content or intake have less cardiovascular disease, have less degenerative disease, have less cancer as well. Look at the fiber intake. Poor intake on your left, digestive discomfort, symptoms, slow transit. In other words, if you have slow transit, you become toxic. Irregularity, constipation, intestinal ill health. Whereas the high fiber, psychological well-being, optimal stool weight and transit time, it goes through much faster and it eliminates a lot of toxicity. Diets and constipation. So on the left, again, you will see foods that will slow you down. And on the right, you will see high fiber foods that will make you go. So again, the same kind of good guys and the same bad guys. There's not a lot of difference here. White bread, white rice, cheese, milk, ice cream will definitely be constipating or slowing your digestion down. Meat will slow your digestion as well. Whereas whole grains, brown rice, fruits, vegetables, spinach, nuts, seeds, legumes will definitely speed up your digestion and speed up your elimination as well. So what I would suggest is, number one, of course, you need water. So if you're not drinking enough water, nothing is going to work. But assuming that you do have enough water, anywhere between 8 to 12 glasses, I would suggest that the source of fiber is also important, that you get 20% from fruit, 20% from whole grain, 35% from vegetables, 15% from legumes, and about 10% from nuts and seeds. And you will have amazing bowel movements and you will have amazing stool. And speaking about your stool, maybe it's not the most kind of fascinating subject, but I think that it's required here. What is considered to be severe constipation, even if you have the bowel movement, and these are separate little hard lumps, that is constipation. If you have lumpy and sausage-like, it's still lumpy, that's still mild constipation. Normal, sausage shape, okay? And normal, the best is obviously when you have a smooth kind of sausage shape or a snake, normal stool. When it's starting to break up, you're getting into lacking fiber, and when it gets mushy or liquid, that obviously that's going to be diarrhea. That's not healthy as well, because you're going to demineralize yourself with chronic diarrhea as well. Now, vitamin D deficiency, why I'm talking about this is because approximately 600,000 of breast and colorectal cancers could be prevented by raising blood levels of vitamin D. Okay? One of the most important cancer substances known to science. In other words, the sun is there for us to appreciate it. More sunshine, less breast cancer. There's been many kind of studies that have shown that women that live in the southern United States have less breast cancer versus women living in northern portion of the country. Okay, it's not, again, it's not necessarily because of their diet, but strictly because of more sunshine versus less sunshine. If you're using sunscreens, anything over number 8 will stop your vitamin D production. Even if you're sunbathing, even if you're supplementing, you still need at least 20 minutes of sunshine on your skin. You don't need to burn yourself, but you need to expose yourself to sunshine. Also, consider this, that 75% of people, and again, you can test this with your blood test, are vitamin D deficient. Cholesterol actually is the base structure of vitamin D. And remember that cholesterol is needed for your hormone production. Statin drugs that basically block cholesterol also compromise vitamin D production. And if you live in northern countries where you're not getting enough sunshine during the winter months, definitely look into using full spectrum lights. So risk factors for vitamin D deficiency, medications, such medications such as antifungals, that will also affect your vitamin D. Now, obesity and deficiency will lead to obesity, will lead to certain syndromes, to cystic fibrosis, to hepatic renal failure, low vitamin D intake, breastfed infants. Again, very important for moms and babies to have enough vitamin D. Inadequate sun exposure, indoor environment, people cover themselves up. That also leads to vitamin D deficiency. And finally, again, it will contribute to all sorts of diseases because vitamin D is very important. Now, introducing anti-estrogenic diet, we're talking about food, we're talking about hormones. Now, let me show you, I want you to understand how simple it is. You don't need any diet books, and actually it's not really a diet, it's a way of living, okay? Diets fail, but I want you to kind of concentrate on eating more fruits and vegetables, eat more legumes, eat more roots, nuts, seeds, eggs, wild fish, fresh dairy. Now, as I said, if it's kind of organic eggs, if it's wild fish, and if it's unpolluted kind of dairy. So, you know, having said that, I think you understand exactly what I mean by this. No processed grains, no sugar, nothing from overfed farm animals and refined processed or chemically loaded food, okay? So if you are going to buy groceries, go usually to the outside of your grocery store where they sell fruits and vegetables, and inside they usually sell processed foods or canned foods. Minimize the intake of chemically loaded conventional food. Eat organic as much as possible. Eliminate estrogenic foods and chemicals. I will show you which ones are estrogenic. And supplement with hormone supportive nutrients. Again, we'll go through this very shortly. And remember, we were talking about liver detoxification. Here it is. So that's the essence of the anti-estrogenic diet. Just eat what the foods that we just discovered, or maybe not discovered, but kind of emphasized as good guys versus bad guys. Xenoestrogens will lead to weight gain. In other words, if you look at this picture here, look at the estrogen will go into the estrogen receptor and give a signal. The xenoestrogen is not really estrogen. These are industrial pollutants. These are kind of mimicking estrogens. They also go into that estrogen receptor, but the signal is completely different, and usually it's much more powerful. So the conversion of testosterone to estrogen happens in someone's adipose tissue, in the fat cells, okay? And extra estrogen will lead to belly fat, more taking testosterone and converting that to estrogen. And this process continues. That's why it's much easier to gain weight than to lose weight. Now, I warned you about the hormones in all that meat and dairy you eat. Okay, so you can see how someone is developing not just one, but several nipples, and he's starting to look like a cow, even he's growing a tail. A little comic relief. Anti-estrogenic foods. Remember, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, citrus fruits are great. Omega-3 oils in flax, in hemp, fish, cold wild fish, cold water, deep ocean fatty fish, organic dairy. Remember, in moderate quantities. And I don't think I need to even talk about organic versus conventional dairy, because I think most of you know the difference. Progesterone promoting foods are raw nuts and seeds, avocado, olives and olive oil, stabilized rice germ oil, and stabilized wheat germ oil. And finally, for immune surveillance, in other words, to boost your immune system and to make sure that your immunity kind of works well. Number one, if you're concerned about breast cancer, avoid unmetabolized folic acid. Okay, just look into that, and you'll see that there's a higher incidence of folic acid supplementation and breast cancer. Other than that, garlic, great for your immune system. Mistletoe, Siberian ginseng, use probiotics. Melatonin is great. Bromelain, vitamin C, magnesium, omega-3. Mushrooms. Generally, mushrooms are very anti-cancer substances. And surprisingly, you don't have to go to esoteric mushrooms, such as turkey tail. Turkey tail is a very, very strong cancer suppressor, but I just don't have enough time to devote a lot of time to it. But regular button mushrooms work very well as well. Mitake mushrooms, reishi mushrooms also work very well. I would eat blueberries on daily basis. And as I said, have a cup of green tea, make sure that you walk at least, exercise, relax, use music therapy, watch funny movies. There's a lot of nasty stuff on the news. Try and avoid that. Social and emotional support, again, very, very important. Finally, for breast cancer prevention. So there are specific nutrients such as turmeric, D-limonene in citrus fruits, omega-3, as I mentioned before, alpha-lipoic acid, and acetylcysteine, great substance as well. Special vitamins, I would use vitamin B2, B6, B12, vitamin C, D, E, and K, especially K2 and K7. Very much anti-cancer and keeping your cardiovascular system healthy as well. Beta carotene, maintain healthy intestines. So probiotics, fermented foods could be used as well. As long as, again, these are clean foods. Mineral supplements, can't say enough about magnesium. One of my favorite in terms of supplementation. Selenium is also very, very important. The specialty supplements, I mentioned those before. Indole-3-carbinol, DIM, calcium diglucarate. So it's not calcium, it's calcium diglucarate. Do not take calcium if you are prone to cardiovascular disease. Actually, I don't suggest anyone take calcium unless it's absolutely necessary, and usually it's not. IP6, glutathione, iodine. Iodine is, my best recommendation to you is look into Lugol's solution. It's a combination of iodine and iodine, and it really works very, very well. A specific anti-estrogenic diet, you're looking at cruciferous vegetables, omega-3, fish, flaxseed, fiber, get that fiber content up, low glycemic index, and liver detoxification. And one of the biggest anti-cancer nutrients are turmeric, calcium D-glucarate, milk thistle to clean your liver, indole 3-carbinol and DIM to help with estrogen metabolism, vitamin D, very, very important, and finally, as I mentioned before, iodine. Now, I think we're coming to the end, so I want you to understand that you can do something about this. You can listen to this and say, well, that was very nice or wasn't nice. It's up to you to decide. But you can create a plan out of this. In other words, avoid obesogens, avoid electromagnetic radiation. We didn't have time to talk about this. Environmental carcinogens, balance your hormones. You have information from last time to understand how to balance your hormones, and with using foods as well. Address endocrine disorders. Specifically, I look at adrenals and thyroid. Maintain proper weight. I know it's not easy for some people, but again, if you understand how hormones, how what you eat, how you exercise, and how you think, then you have definitely, you have a leg up in terms of understanding how to maintain your proper weight. Maintain an anti-estrogenic diet, as I keep saying over and over again. Healthy nutrition. Practice breast self-examination, okay, and safe screening modalities, such as thermography. Address emotional health issues, okay? Again, very important, we started with that. Activate lymphatic and immune systems. Correct nutrient and vitamin deficiencies. Don't guess, test. Remember that your dental and oral health plays a huge, huge component in your overall health. Maintain appropriate level of physical activity and fitness, reduce stress, create a life of purpose. Easier said than done, but if you're going after this, go after this with vengeance. Self-expression, very, very important that you are self-expressed. And remember that knowledge is power, and something that my late father once told me, never make important decisions when you're angry or fearful, okay? So be responsible for your own health, and remember that every action counts. I know you may not be able to do all. If you do some action is better than none, and it will definitely lead to your results. So finally, I want to take you to the end, but this is not the end. This is just the beginning. So I want to thank you for being with us, for staying with us. I hope it was informative. I tried to distill to kind of simple and yet effective things, as I said from the beginning. I wish you all great health. If you have any questions, if you have any recommendations, any suggestions, please email to us. We're always eager to hear from you. And I bid you all good night, and thank you once again for being with us. Until next time.